with you.
Hi, Kelly. It's Nikki. We're just convening.
Oh, hi, Nikki. Okay, no problem.
Hi, it's Jared. So,
Oh, Jared, hi. Long time no see.
yes. And it's going to be longer, it seems.
It does.
Schools are now closed till April 27th.
Oh, are they really?
Yes, he made the announcement today, or I think the superintendent, Salmon, made the announcement today.
So everyone's learning what it's like to be me. I homeschooled my kids.
But,
So school closures for snow, they were snowed into school, not out of it.
I think I saw Andrea joined. Andrea, are you there? Andrea?
Nikki, are you going to post the agenda?
I was not going to. Unless, if somebody needs me to, I can.
I think that would be helpful.
Hello?
This is Mike Kogan. Can you hear me? Anybody?
Yeah.
Yes, Mike, this is Kelly. I can hear you.
Okay, thanks. I've been having some technical difficulties here. Okay, Kelly, you're on the line. DJ? DJ on the line? Malcolm? Bill?
Bill is here.
Okay, so Kelly and Bill are here, Malcolm and DJ not yet. Linda and Nikki, I know you're both on the line, correct?
Yeah, this is Nikki. And Linda's on
Okay.
too. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we're waiting for DJ and Malcolm.
And also on the phone is Webster Yee from the Maryland Department of Health. He's muted, but he is on the phone as well.
Okay, great. Webster, welcome to the... Go ahead, Nikki.
I displayed the agenda. Can someone confirm that you can see it? If you've logged in, hang up.
I haven't logged in. Yeah, I can.
You can see it.
Yes, I can see it. This is Mary.
Okay. All right, thanks.
All right. And do we know that, are we broadcasting? Do we know that we have sound?
I've asked someone to let me know. I haven't heard. Gary, are you in the office? Are you in the lobby?
Nikki, I can try to go through our live stream on my computer and see if I can hear it.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, this is Tracy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can.
So I've got the live stream up on my computer also, and I could hear you guys at first, but the screen has gone green, and I'm not hearing any sound at the moment.
All right, someone is texting me saying sound is working.
Okay.
Okay. That's what we really need.
Here, it is working.
Okay. Hello, Nikki. Can anybody hear me? Yes, Malcolm, we can hear you. That's on, but
DJ.
okay. DJ, you're on now.
Can you
Okay.
hear me?
I can. This is Mike. All right. At this point, we have the entire board: Kelly, Bill, PJ, and Malcolm, myself, Linda, and Nikki are on the line. Andrea, are you on the line?
I am on the line. Can you hear me, Mike?
I can hear you. Thank you. And we have a representative from the Department of Health, Webster Yee, who is also on the line. He's on. He's muted himself right now, but he's monitoring and will respond when we have stuff. Okay. With that, I am convening this meeting of the State Board of Elections, and I am declaring there is a quorum present by the voice responses that we have had for this meeting. Before we begin with the next agenda item, I just want to make a few remarks. For the staff, and only the staff, I'd like to welcome you to the first scheduled seminar on Black Swan Events 101. As we recall, the Black Swan occurs when there's a highly improbable event which has a highly significant impact if it occurs. We'll be focused on these aspects in this seminar. I would note that the third component of Black Swans is the persons with 20/20 hindsight will explain why we should have foreseen and or prepared for the event. That component will be covered in future seminars. On a serious note, I want to apologize to my fellow board members. I would have liked to engage you with at least certain of the procedural matters leading up to this meeting. However, even with the apparently tireless, given the timestamps on some emails, assistance and advice of legal counsel, we did not see a clear path through the rocks and shoals of the Open Meeting Act to follow that course of action. And when I reached the point where I was just going to do it anyway, by that time the materials were out. We were within like about 24 hours of the meeting, and at that point there wasn't really much more to pass on to you. I do want to tell everyone that I am proud to report that while it has been a difficult time on so many levels, the staff at the state and local levels have performed magnificently, right to the point of exhaustion. They deserve more thanks than they will ever receive, and they have my profound thanks now. Members, you may have noted there's another meeting scheduled for April 2nd. That should have been, it's mentioned at least in passing in documentation you received. I directed that there be two meetings because in this meeting we will be addressing, in addition to other things which must be decided immediately, the draft plan for the June election. That plan will be presented in final form on April 2nd, sent to the governor on April 3rd. We must make decisions today and on April 2nd and beyond. Our normal mode is careful decision making, attention to detail on long lead times, with meetings spaced monthly. Those are not the times in which we are now living. The staff must prepare and we must decide on the basis of what we now have and what we now know, and not on the basis of what we want to have and want to know. There is little time for revision unless there is a major problem or significant new information. We should all let our guiding philosophy be, the best is now the enemy of good enough. If it's good enough, it is good enough. Finally, this may be a meeting in which strong arguments were made and positions strenuously advocated. I ask everyone to remember that nothing is personal. I would also like to ask everyone to briefly identify themselves each time they speak, because that will make taking the minutes much easier. Ms. Lamone is also asked to make a few preliminary remarks. Linda?
Thank you, Mike. Yes, I just want to echo what you said about my deep gratitude to not only the State Board of Election staff, especially Nikki, but also to the local boards of election staff. Everybody has just been working almost 24/7 to try to come up with a way to pull off the next two elections in April and June. And without Nikki's leadership and organization, we never would have made it, and we owe her profound thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. And with that, let us turn to the next agenda items, which is the ratification of minutes. Yes.
May I ask a question? You said something about the next meeting, April 2nd, that we should all know that, and I'm not looking at anything that says April 2nd. Am I missing a document?
I believe there's something, or at least there was something at one point in some of the documentation that made a reference to April 2nd. We're going to need to meet on April 2nd, as I said,
okay,
to approve the plan that will go to the governor on the 3rd. The meeting today, I specifically directed that there be two meetings.
Okay.
And that's because I didn't want to reach April 2nd without the board having been engaged and involved in the process of what that plan would look like.
Yes, I understand. It's just I printed and read everything carefully, and if something says April 2nd, I completely missed it.
It may be me. It may be it may be something that I thought I saw, or it may have appeared in one document and then been deleted at a later time. But in any event, I will. Go ahead.
This is Malcolm. This is the first time I've heard of April 2nd. I printed things off and I read and reread the documents that were sent to me. I saw nothing about April 2nd. I may have to change some plans I've made for April 2nd, but I'll make it work.
Okay, that is much appreciated. Thank you. Okay, so ratification of minutes for the February 27th, 2020 meeting. These minutes have been distributed electronically. May I have a motion to approve unless someone has a question or concern about the minutes that hasn't already been raised and addressed, may I have a motion for ratification of the minutes?
This is Phil. I move to ratify.
Malcolm, second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are ratified. Additions to the agenda, none formal. I suspect that we may see things creep on as we go along. The Assistant Attorney General's report, that came out I'm looking at I've got my screen up. I'm trying to be as efficient on this as PJ normally is with his electronic stuff. We've got an Assistant AG report. It came out about an hour ago. 12:51, and I have told the Assistant Attorney General that unless there is something that specifically he wants to inform us of, that we're simply going to accept it in its written form. Andrea, do you have anything that you wish to add to the written report?
No, I think the written report speaks for itself, except there's
let me break in. That came across very faint and scratchy to me.
It's because I moved my microphone off. Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
I apologize. There's just one new matter that I think the board should be made aware of. A petition for judicial review was filed by one of the officers of the Washington County Republican Party committee. Judicial review of the contents and arrangement of the Republican primary ballots that would be in effect for precincts and locations within Hagerstown, Maryland. The challenge was based on the fact that the Republican Party ballots included nonpartisan contests for specifically the contests for mayor and for city council of Hagerstown, which in recent years were changed by city charter to nonpartisan contests. The allegation is that a separate ballot was not used for those, and that the individuals identified as candidates for those contests, party affiliation was not identified. The petition was filed. There were some procedural issues with the petition. Those were remedied, but well after the period at which the ballot printing process started. We have reached an agreement with the petitioner regarding notices that would be posted and distributed with the ballots and with any specimen ballots that are sent out to affected voters and posted at any polling places that are used for that primary election, basically stating that those contests are nonpartisan contests and that every party's primary ballot will have the same candidates listed on it.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for the Assistant Attorney General? Hearing none, I'll declare the written report received and accepted by the board. Which brings us to agenda item number 5, plans for April 28th, 2020 CD7 election. Who's going to handle that one?
This is Nikki. I can do that.
Mr. Chairman, this is P.J. Hogan. Can I just say something very quickly?
Yes,
I'm sure others like me, I have lots of questions on this. I would like to just make a suggestion that we all hold our questions until we get through the all A, B, C, D, and E under this item.
I understand what you're saying. I agree if no one has an objection to that. And then we can go back to the top and kind of go through each one. Does anybody have any questions about this, any issues, and so on and so forth? That's a great idea, PJ.
This is Malcolm. I agree with that, but I'm seeing things on the agenda that I haven't seen in writing anything. I don't have a copy of the COMAR that they're mentioning, a list of the vote centers, canvass process. I don't have any of that information.
No. Go ahead, Nikki.
Right, so this is Nikki. Malcolm, you don't. You should have emergency regs. We distributed those yesterday. But these are all just points we were going to discuss. Only one of them has a related document.
Okay, I do have the emergency regs. I do have that.
And that's all that, for this agenda item, that's all you would have.
Oh, okay, so all of this is verbal and we have to make sure that everything comes across clear. Thank you.
So, yes.
No, go. Go ahead.
So one of the documents we did provide to you was the Governor's Proclamation, which did change the 7th Congressional District Special General Election from a normal election on April 28th to a vote-by-mail election. And as we've been diligently working through how to do that, we've identified a few areas that we wanted to discuss with you and ask for considered action either today or in the very near future. In planning this vote-by-mail election, we do actually have a statute that is in effect for vote-by-mail special elections. And we are trying, to the extent practicable, following that statute. So some of the things we'll be talking about are in there and others are not. But we have been trying to follow that statute best we can. In looking at the vote-by-mail election, and voter registration deadline, which is historically 21 days before an election. We see that as the special election vote by mail section allows, it's for a delayed change of address voter registration deadline. And so we would like the board to consider moving the voter registration deadline to April 21st. That is 1 week before the election. And the reason for that is that because there's not an in-person election, all of the work to prepare for, or let me go back. Because there's not early voting for this election, the time needed to prepare the poll books goes away. So we don't need that extra time to prepare the poll books for early voting. We just need the time to get the absentee ballots out, or the vote by mail ballots is what we're calling them, and prepare for in-person voting at vote centers, which we're going to get to 2 agenda items down. So in consultation with the voter registration division and the voting system division, and what all the processes that have to happen to do that, we believe that we can move the voter registration deadline back to April 21st and still deliver a vote by mail election with some in-person voting. The B under here is adoption of emergency regulations, which you should have a single page document. I'm just pulling it up. Which is proposing to amend 33.19.02.01. So subtitle 19 is in the same-day registration and address change section, and it's under the public notice chapter. So the law that corresponds to this requires that we provide appropriate measures to notify individuals of their likely eligibility to register and where they can register and vote on the same day. We had that contract in process. It was being printed by the Maryland Correctional Enterprises, and Tracy was told last week that because in response to the virus and social distancing that they have reduced their print shop staff and will not be able to get out the planned mailing before the April 28th election. So Tracy and Whitney are diligently trying to find another printer to do that, and it looks like we may be able to find someone who can do that by our deadline. But just in case we can't, we're requesting emergency repeal of subsection A that requires the mailing, just for this and the June election, just in case we have a similar issue there. It would go back into effect after the end of it, so it would be in effect for November and moving forward. With the repeal of Section A, we would still be obligated to meet the requirements of the code, which say appropriate measures, and we can do that in various different ways, posting information on our website, social media, trying to get some news coverage. So we would still be obligated to take appropriate measures to notify individuals about the same-day registration opportunity. It would just be repealing the mailing just for the April election and the June 2nd election, which we're going to talk about next. So we go back to the agenda. C, and I think C, I'm going to, Andrea, ask you to explain the vote centers and why they need to be offered.
Sure. So this is Andrea Trento. You all know me as the Assistant Attorney General. The vote by mail, the statute, again, that Nikki said that we're using as a guidepost in preparing a plan for this vote by mail election, contemplates the use of vote centers to allow for in-person voting. And every state, every jurisdiction that conducts elections principally by mail, some of the ones that we've all heard about in the news recently are Washington and Oregon. They allow for, they too provide vote centers to allow for in-person voting by people. Several classes of voters can take advantage of these. There are people for whom, for disability or other reason, cannot mark a mail ballot by hand and require the use of an assisted device. The Americans with Disabilities Act could potentially require this kind of provision of an in-person voting opportunity. The Help America Vote Act requires that each polling place have an accessible voting device in it. It's reconciling that with the fact that we're vote by mail it's not exactly on point, but the principle suggests that there needs to be a way for people who are unable to vote by conventional means or by hand-marked ballot to be able to cast their ballot. Third, there are people that, just as a matter of their own situation, have difficulty receiving mail, do not have access to the mail, and will be excluded from an election that provides ballots only to those people who can get mail. So that would be a third category of individual for whom a vote by mail or a vote center would be required in order for them to be able to exercise the franchise. And lastly, in every election, there is some percentage of the inactive voters that are on Maryland's voter registration rolls who do appear in person to vote. Inactive voters are generally inactive because the mailings sent out by the Board of Elections or the local boards of elections to these voters are returned as undeliverable for one reason or another. The post office seems to think that voter isn't there anymore. We could send ballots out to these voters who still remain registered and are entitled to vote. We could send ballots out to them, but in all likelihood those ballots will be returned just like other mail that's sent to them is returned to the boards of elections. So those vote by mail jurisdictions that I described earlier, they generally don't send ballots to inactive voters for that reason. It's just a waste of money. But in any election, 1 to 4%, I think is the number that I've heard, of inactive voters on the rolls actually will show up to vote, and providing an opportunity, an in-person opportunity for them to do so, allows them to exercise the franchise, doesn't exclude them like a vote by mail, an exclusively vote by mail election would. And so those are the kind of legal bases for why, understanding that there are extreme, circumstances that confront the local boards of election that will be administering this, and the situation that all voters would face at a voting center. But it's something that, in my opinion, we can't just exclude certain voters from being able to participate in this election because of these incredible circumstances that we're in. And so, I'll put the rest to Nikki to kind of fill in the rest of it. That's my legal view.
Thanks, Andrea. This is Nikki Charlton. To be fair, this has been quite a topic of hot discussion, as you can imagine. And obviously we want to, since we are legally required to provide them in the safest way possible, not just for voters, but for our election judges who are staffing them. So I'm just going to continue to move through the last two, and then we can go back and talk about any or all of these. The canvass process, D and E are somewhat tied together. The canvass process, again, for a vote by mail special election is laid out in statute where they can start counting ballots at 2 o'clock on election day, so in this case, April 28th. And then it's sort of silent as to how long it takes and when it has to be certified. We do know that the code requires certification by the second Friday after the election. But with the volume of ballots involved, it will take longer to do that than normal. Even if ballots start being counted election day and continue through the 10 days, there is still a chance that the results for this election will be beyond the typical 10-day window. It is not a reflection on the local boards in any way. It's a sheer volume and the ability to, Bill, you know better than probably any of the rest of us here that the canvassing process is a very labor-intensive process with lots of people operating in the same space, all of which violates all of the social distancing guidelines that have been put in place to keep us safe. And so it might mean less people working to create the space, and it will take more time. And so those are the canvassing procedures are one place that we are paying a lot of attention to. How can we, in addition to offering in-person voting in a safe environment, how do we offer canvassing in that same safe environment for the local boards of elections? So just raising that as we need to be thinking about how the canvassing can happen in a safe environment, and understanding that it very well may take longer than the normal 10 days to do that. And so both of those might mean requiring changes to regulations and extending deadlines that are in code. And so we're raising them now to discuss them in the likelihood that we come back and ask for postponement of deadlines and changes to procedures. And with that, I will stop.
Okay. Okay, I'm trying to think of the best way to do this. Okay, as to changes, I'm going to try and do it this way. As to changes to the voter registration deadline, does anyone have any questions or comments about that? I hear none. Okay, the adoption of the emergency regulations, which is actually an emergency repeal, partial repeal of regulations. Does anybody have any questions or comments about that?
I just have one comment for the record. We have adoption of emergency regulations, COMAR 3309. I believe that's supposed to be 3319.
That's correct.
So you might want to change that for, just for the record.
Okay, thank you, Malcolm.
So I have a question. What is going to be if we are having voting centers in a mail election? How are we conveying that if we're not doing a mailing to people that option exists? Is that just going to be from social media and the press? What's the strategy there?
Okay, remember, Bill, identify yourself for the record.
Sorry.
And Nikki, do you want to handle that one?
Sure. So this is Nikki Charlton. So we will be doing press outreach website. We've put on our website that there will be in-person voting with the vote centers to be determined, the location. We will just be happy to spread that word. There just isn't time to do a mailing for anything at this point. Our mail house is not able to get us anything out in time, which is why we are looking at others, but there's no guarantee that we can get them. Those submissions are due Friday, so we'll have a better idea Friday about the capacity of vendors to help us get the word out.
This is Malcolm. I don't envy you in what you have to do. We're under certain circumstances that we've never experienced before, and I know that as a result of this, a number of people may have changed location of where they're living or where they're staying, and they may never receive notification, but yet they may be aware of where they're supposed to vote, those that want to vote. I guess I want to know what efforts are made to contact those persons where the return mail has been provided. How would they be contacted to ensure that they would have the opportunity to vote? Because in looking at what's taking place, some folks may be quarantined, and they may not be able to go to a place. They may never receive the polls. And I know you may not have the answer to this, but these are some things we have to, have to consider and be flexible enough to accommodate anyone during this period of time.
So I have a couple.
Maybe doesn't require an answer, just a comment.
Right, so Nikki Charlton. So I think that repealing the regulation A gives us that flexibility. It puts it back to the code, which is appropriate measures. And so we appreciate the voter education piece that has to go along with that. At this point, we need to be able to give the information, which is what we're talking about today. How many vote centers? Where are they? those kinds of things. Those are all the pieces of information that we have before we can start doing the necessary outreach. But outreach, you're right, is critical, and we will be doing that. We're just not ready. We're just not able to do that yet because we don't have all the parts in place yet.
Well, Malcolm Fudd, I can appreciate that, and I was just wondering if the vote centers would number the same number of voting precincts, or they would be less than the precincts, because some people may be aware of where they're voting, but they may never receive anything through the mail, and they may go to where they voted the last time. But I know these are things that have to be worked out, so.
So this is Nikki Charleston again. For the April 28th, the vote by mail special election statute requires one vote center per county. So there would be one vote center in Baltimore City, one vote center in Baltimore County, and one vote center in Howard County. And we've asked the 3 local boards to provide us with their preferred location, understanding that that building may not be open today, but what is their preferred location? So again, in trying to follow the statute of vote by mail for special elections, there will be one vote center in each of the 3 counties for this election.
Okay, this is Mike. Let me break in at this point. It may be useful. Mr. Yee, Health Department, are you on the line? I'm here. Oh, okay, sir. I know that you are well aware of the issues involved here and the concerns that we have. What is the Health Department's perspective on the early voting, not the early votings, but the voting centers? Let's just stay with that for right now.
Well, I think I'll save my remarks in detail until you tell me to, and I've got a few minutes to talk about it. But with our general advice to the State Board of Elections is really simple. One, whenever possible, keep large clumps of people from congregating, and so to do whatever general operating principles work towards minimizing the amount of person-to-person interaction and minimize a gathering of people, a large clump of people. And a large clump of people now is anything over 10. The second part, and the second major comment, I guess, for any type of voting center or in-person voting, as many of you have heard, we have a global shortage of protective equipment. Any supply of masks and gloves or whatever else, once it's used up, we cannot expect a resupply anytime soon. We're telling that to all first responders, all healthcare folks, and pretty much anyone else. So our basic advice right now is the state stockpile is dwindling very quickly. We're getting very limited federal resupply. It's pretty much all going to New York State at this point. And the private industry, we're trying to ramp up our in-Maryland industry, but there's no guarantee right now, and of course prices are going crazy. So any voting center that has stood up in person, I don't believe that the state at this point on March 25th can guarantee personal protective equipment for any poll workers or judges or any staff at those sites. So in other words, if we do an in-person voting center, those folks need to know that there's a very high possibility that they may get infected with the coronavirus.
I appreciate the candor of what you just said, and I believe that you have crystallized some of the issues right there, and you have no idea how much I appreciate that. So,
this is Malcolm. PJ, you're breaking up. I mean, you're breaking up.
Is this better?
Yes, that's better, Mike.
Can you hear it better this way?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I was saying, and I don't know how much of it broke up, that I appreciated Mr. Yee's candor and direct answers to the questions that we have. And the issue that I think in front of us, in addition has raised, and they are no small issues that he has raised, is that all of us on the board, everybody that's active on this call, knows that most of our election judges are retirees. They are people that have the time to be able to do this. And obviously another significant group that we draw from is, for example, state workers or county workers in some instances. But we have a population, and anyone that's ever gone to a voting site knows it's a population that tends to be older, putting them in the higher risk categories. So we cannot, at this point, and this is why I prefaced this meeting by saying we have to make decisions on what we know now, not what we'd like to know or not what we might know sometime in the future. We cannot provide personal protective equipment to any of our voting personnel. That would be judges at election centers, it would be staff helping out or doing whatever. And I cannot tell you, Mr. Yee, how much I appreciate you hitting these things right on the head. The more people that we have doing this, the more casualties we're going to take. And I mean casualty in a sense, people think of that as death. That's not what it means. People who will become sick, people who will be, in that sense, unable to do their normal routine, or whatever it might be. They'll become infected, to use Mr. Yee's words. So that, I think, is the crux of the problem that we have right now. And when Nikki mentioned in her remarks about this in her explanation, that the local boards have very strong feelings on this. I know that they do as well, based on conversation I've had. And this is, I think, the most significant of our issues right here. We may have problems that Malcolm related, and there may be voters that will find themselves unable to vote for a variety of reasons. They go to a building and it's closed, that type of thing. But the bigger issue that we're going to have, I believe, is how many people will we actually have to staff the polls under those circumstances. We can't order these people in. It's not the military. We can't order them to take risks with their health and their lives. So we are solely dependent, and I'm saying this as much for the record as anything else. We are solely dependent on volunteers and to make these things work. And I believe that, speaking solely for myself, I believe we have a responsibility to both our staff at the state and local levels, but I'm talking about the local levels now. We have a responsibility to our staff there. We have a responsibility to those good citizens that have stepped forward to work the polls over the historical time period. We have a responsibility to them as well. And I have very strong feelings about the advisability of having in-person voting, other than on a very, very limited basis. And I know there's been a discussion in terms of, for example, voters could make an appointment to go to a location, and for a disabled voter, for example, and be able to use the machine at that location. And the appointments obviously would be staggered, and so on and so forth. So there is that possibility, but that would be a limited availability. I don't believe that the statutes adequately provide for this kind of situation. It's not a criticism of anything. It's more my statement of what I believe I'm seeing. They simply don't provide for this kind of situation. And they don't provide for the probability that we're going to have people simply resigning, either as volunteers or staff, rather than go into a scenario where they have a real situation where they can become infected. And if we are paying attention to, and I know everybody on this call is, if we're paying attention to what the health departments at all levels are telling us, it doesn't matter if you're 20 or 30 years old, if you've got a 78-year-old grandmother back at your home that you're going to return to. So we can't even say, oh, well, it'll simply be the older group that won't show up. We can't expect younger people, after they have been told for the last 2 weeks that you could be a carrier and you may not get sick or very sick, but you could seriously hurt someone else that you care about. And then we're asking them to go into the in and work the polls. I don't believe the statute's ever contemplated that, and I don't believe that I'm willing to contemplate that. I have serious concerns about the voting centers, other than an extremely limited basis to allow people who absolutely have to use this kind of technology in order to vote. And that's my thoughts on it. And I opened it up. I'm sorry it took so long. Other thoughts?
Malcolm, I agree with you, Michael. The situation we are in has not been contemplated by any statutes, and to try and follow statutes that would put people's lives in jeopardy is a call that I would not want to make. And sure, everyone should have the right to vote, and opportunity should be made for them to vote, but it should not be to the detriment of people staffing the polls. And as the individual from the health department stated, protection equipment will not be made available to them. So that in itself tells me no way should we jeopardize the lives of anyone for the right to vote. And I would be inclined not to stress the emphasis of voting centers and see what we could do to not only change the law, but make some kind of revision. If they can't vote by mail, they should not have contact with personal. Right now we're saying no more than 10, but in some areas, in some jurisdictions, it's a matter of 2 people gathering together. So I would rather err on the side of safety than otherwise.
Anyone else?
This is P.J. Hogan. With the individuals who require a ballot marking device, can they not have assistance by a friend or family member to help them fill out an absentee ballot or a vote by mail ballot?
Nikki, do you want to handle that? Or Andrea?
Sure. So yeah, they can have someone assist them with their absentee ballot. They'll get a certificate of or certification of person assisting voter or something like that, where their helper fills out that form and sends it back, acknowledging that this ballot was marked with the assistance of another person.
Okay.
I think that's the only way we can deal with this particular situation. If we don't have voting centers that that make ballot marking devices available, someone has to ask for assistance to have their ballot marked. I think this is such a unique situation. The law allows that, and we should encourage that.
Hi, PJ. This is Andrea. Let me just offer some observations. I think it's an interesting proposal of Mike's to something like to make it by appointment only, or to try to severely or drastically curtail the amount of in-person voting that you might expect to encounter at a vote center on April 28th. But it's certainly the case that any disabled voter who is unable to independently mark a ballot, if they wish, can enlist the assistance of others. But by not providing them the opportunity to vote on their own, I just want to make clear that it is excluding that subset of the population from being able to independently and privately vote. And as long as that's clear, and if that's the board's, these are extreme circumstances, and I understand if the board wishes to weigh that sacrifice, for the greater good, as it were, in reaching a policy here. But I want to make that clear that would be the effect of a disallowance of any sort of in-person voting in connection with the April 28th election.
Is there any other, this is PJ Hogan again, is there any other jurisdiction or state around the country that is doing vote by mail right now or anticipating in the next couple of weeks that have made any special accommodations for individuals who cannot mark their own ballot?
Mickey, Linda?
So this is, go ahead,
Linda. I have not seen any press reports or had any discussion with my colleagues one way or the other on that issue. Everybody is doing as fast as they can. They're probably thinking about it. It just doesn't come up in our discussion.
Malcolm Fund. I recognize that people have to have the right to vote, but I'm sort of leaning toward the situation. If a person has disabilities, they're not residing by themselves. They have a caregiver or somebody there. Why shouldn't that person assist them? Why should we jeopardize the health and the life of other people at the expense of someone? We're giving them the right to vote by sending them the ballots. If they do not have the means, that burden shouldn't be on us at the detriment of the health of poll workers. And if you have these devices that every time it's used, it has to be wiped down and with Clorox wipes and everything, do we have those available? I know we don't have the gloves and the mask and the yellow robes and everything, not robes, but the yellow protective clothing. We will also have to have wipes and wipe down everything after anyone uses it. That's just my comment.
I mean, this is PJ Hogan again. As an example, in one of the documents that was sent out, it says Wyoming, primary scheduled for April 4th, state has canceled the in-person portion. Voters may still vote via ballot pickup and drop-off. I got to think that if they've canceled in-person voting, what accommodations have they made for their disabled community? And let me also say I agree with everything that Malcolm just said. I mean, we're giving people the opportunity to vote. Yes, it's not normal circumstances. You may not be able to use a ballot marking device, but these are unique times.
Anybody else?
Yeah, this is Bill Phelps. Wondering, Andrea, would it be wise to reach out to the affected community to ask them if they had any quick strategies that could help us meet their needs in this time of trouble, or if they would be, is that an idea, or do you think that that's probably not a good idea?
Let me make sure I'm on. Okay, I'm not on mute. Hi, Bill. I have had in your materials a letter was sent last week by a group of advocacy organizations, raising several issues. And I did have a phone call with them in response to their letter. And some other disability rights organizations also participated in that. I mean, I certainly didn't poll everybody on this particular issue. I do recall on the phone call that at least one or two people said that they thought that in person a vote center was something that would be needed, and recognized the difficulties it posed, and understood the need to do that in a safe and effective way. I can reach back out to those organizations and say, okay, if the board decides to go in a certain direction, have a conversation with them about what given the direction the board is going in, what can we do as an alternative to make sure that members of the different communities that are represented by these organizations can effectively exercise their vote.
So this is Malcolm. Andrea, I see it in that letter. One of the things they said is we understand the concerns regarding staffing voting centers. They said we are willing to collaborate with the State Board of Elections to recruit individuals to staff the polls. Do they realize that in this recruitment and having people that they're going to subject them to health issues? And then if they're making numerous voting centers available during the primary election, might minimize traffic compared to limited centers that may become overly crowded. But you still have to have the staffing. I mean, I don't think they understand the severity of this situation with this COVID-19. It's not as simple as a lot of people think. And sure, how many people would volunteer to be staffed not having protective clothing and not, be protected? So,
Malcolm, those are all great points. I mean, I assume that the organizations I spoke with, and I heard that on the phone when I spoke with them, but I think they're well aware of the circumstances. I mean, I think that every day in schools there are people handing out food to people that are coming in, picking up homework packets, and there are teachers and administrators who are staffing those facilities to be able to provide that service to the public. It's not as though, and I'm not trying to equate them, the voting service and what's happening in schools every day, but at the same time, I believe that there could be a way to provide a very limited in-person voting where there is not people coming into contact within 6 feet of each other, where there is maybe, I think there may be a safe way to do this. I think that the organizations I spoke with understand the circumstances. They are willing to try to help recruit to staff these locations, and I guess that's my response to your question.
Thank you.
Hi, Mike. This is Linda Lamone. Webster, you still on the phone?
I am.
You just heard Andrea say there's a safe way to provide in-person voting. Do you have any suggestions on how that might happen?
If we knew how to prevent someone from getting infected with absolute certainty, I think the entire world would do everything we can. Unfortunately, we can't. We don't know a foolproof method of protecting someone, aside from just staying away from other humans. Unfortunately, all scientific evidence seems to suggest that you can be infectious without showing symptoms, and that's how this coronavirus is able to spread so quickly and silently. What we are trying to do as a state is, I think, as many of you have heard on the national news and the local news, it's just to encourage staying away from other people, social distancing. I can provide a lot more specific statistics, but the basic point is 2 weeks ago on March the 13th, we had 17 positive cases in the state. and with 0 hospitalized. Today, 2 weeks later, we're at 423 positives with 67 hospitalized. By April 1st or April 2nd, by the time that you folks next meet, we'll probably be over or right around the 1,800 mark for positives, and hopefully we won't have about 1,000 hospitalized. I can tell you the following statistics from our emergency medical colleagues. As of today, our current available ICU beds are about 396. We've asked all of the hospitals to get basically everyone out of the hospital to prepare for this coming wave. And then in the state right now, we have a little bit over 2,000 hospital beds available, and then we have 1,000 ventilators. So at some point in the next 2 months, and our state experts are, not state experts, but the public health folks at Hopkins and University of Maryland are predicting that this will last for months and not weeks, that we will probably be getting closer towards exhausting the state's hospital capacity. And we're trying to do everything we can to slow down that rate of increase so that we're able to care for people in the state's hospitals and not have to resort to the convention center or shut down high schools or outside.
Anyone else? Okay. Go ahead. No, come on. Go ahead.
Myself, I'm not willing to take that chance. This virus is animal-born, so we don't have natural immunity against it. Normal cold and flu and everything is human-born, and we have natural immunities to a lot of that. But this animal-born virus, we don't have natural immunities, and then once it's carried, it mutates, and they're finding out that it's mutating at a greater rate. That's why some people can have it, not experience symptoms, but can pass it on to others. I'm in almost virtual lockdown where I am because we're not communicating with anybody in this community. We're having our meals brought to us instead of meeting in a gathering at the dining room and everything. And whenever we go out and come back, we have to be sign documents that we haven't been around anyone, and they take our temperature, which is a very nominal, minor thing. And one of the problems that we're having with this whole thing, we don't know who has it and who doesn't because we haven't tested anybody. And to subject anybody, even someone that volunteers to work with somebody, we're subjecting them. And personally, I don't want to take that risk to ask somebody to do that. But that's my personal feeling about it. And looking at the health issues and the scientific aspect of it, this is something that is unlike anything we have faced in our lifetime. And but like I say, what was it? King Henry the Seventh. When the Black Plague came through, he quarantined himself in his room, and he didn't get it, and everybody else did. So the best thing to do is just to stay away from people. And if we're going to put out a type of a situation that people have to come and associate with other individuals, I think we're taking a great risk, and I'm wondering if it's worth it. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I just, I'm here mulling over, Nikki said earlier that I hadn't thought of. I mean, how do you even count these? And so my brain has been moving ever since she made that comment earlier. And I think we have other issues. I mean, another comment that was made, I think Nikki had said it, was that they're picking the LBEs are picking the locations they'd like to have. Well, it can't be a library. I mean, they're so limited in where they can be because most places are closed. So especially when we're on to the April, we don't know what's going to happen yet in June. We pray that we'll be more back to normal and there'll be places available. But, for the April one, what if we have no place that can accommodate that is available to us? What do we do then? I mean, so, we may be forced into a mail election because we all mail, because we don't have a place to actually have someone come to vote that is indeed open. And then what do we do with the no more than 10? I mean, you're going to have people wait in line, and what if it rains that day? I mean, there's just so many things. I think it's very difficult to how to pull this off. I'm just trying to go through my mind, how to even do it. I think it's a real mental gymnastics here.
Bill, did you mean to turn your video on? There you go.
Sorry, that was me, actually. I had to unshare the screen for a minute, so we're back.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other thoughts they want to express on this topic?
Well,
okay.
This is Kelly Howell. I just wanted to clarify that for vote centers, we're talking for the special general, we're talking about only 3 of them, right? 1 in each county? Is
That's correct. That is correct.
Special elections tend to have low turnout, and we are also going to be saturating the mail system with mailed absentee ballots. So most people are going to be using absentee ballots. I don't see a whole lot of people showing up at vote centers. And we have to accommodate, in addition to the disabled people who might need a ballot marking device in order to vote privately and independently, we also have to think about people who might be inactive voters who want to vote anyway and can't do that with their absentee ballot. They have to show up in person somewhere. So unless I'm reading this wrong, I see only 3 centers and I see very little traffic. And I know that there's no way to guarantee that no one will be infected, but if you've been to the grocery store, you've seen the measures that they're taking. Tape on the floor saying you have to stand back 6 feet from the person ahead of you. People wearing gloves, and I know that surgical gloves may not be available, but other kinds of rubber gloves, a lot of people have them in their house. I have some gloves in my house. There are some basic procedures that can be taken to help improve safety. And if we've only got 3 early voting centers and they're very, very lightly used for the special general election, I think we're okay.
This is PJ. Who would staff those voting centers?
Well, we'd have to rely on volunteers. And if we couldn't get any volunteers, then I guess we'd have to close it. I was just going to say that I guess with my frequent trip to the grocery store, I see all these people working and people delivering mail and doing all kinds of things. So people are out there. I think that the perspective is if you're in an assisted living place, I mean, the danger there is so extreme that they're taking extraordinary measures, and that sort of affects your thinking about it. But we aren't completely shut down. There are people working.
This is Malcolm. I defer to a gentleman named Webster from the health department. It looked at how we're up to over 400 and some confirmed carriers or persons having the COVID-19, which is almost tripled in the space of a week. And we don't know what it's going to be like in April. And I believe you indicated that we have no way of knowing or any idea. And the more that we expose people, the greater this will be. And I would think that we would not want to add exposure. Sure, people go into the grocery stores, into the drug stores, but some things are necessary for substance, and they take a risk at that. But I'm just wondering why we would ask volunteers to do that, even if somebody decides to volunteer to do it on their own. Well, I'm just opposed to exposing more people because we don't know who has it, who will have it, and people can be carriers. And this is something that has never occurred before. And I would refer to the actions of the scientists and people at the health department rather than trying to make that decision myself. Thank you.
Well, this is Kelly again, and I agree with that, and certainly if the health department orders us to shut down the voting centers, I would not stand in the way of the health department. But my point is simply that I think they would be very lightly used, and I think that would give us cover for people with disabilities who have a right to vote independently and privately, and also for people who have, for some reason, become listed as inactive voters, even though they still are eligible. It would give us coverage for that, even though I don't expect very many people at all to be using the voting centers on April 28th. That's my only point.
All right. Any other thoughts on this particular topic? Okay. Everybody has been listening to the same conversation I have. My sense is that the board would really prefer a plan which either minimizes or eliminates any voting centers, focuses on mail with an option, some type of an option that people could vote in person, those who need to, and that similar appointment system or something like that. That seems to be the sense of it. It doesn't speak for every member, but that's my impression. So the question, I think, to Nikki and Linda is, where does that leave us at this point? Because clearly, it would appear to me that a vote, if we were to put a motion to have voting centers in the 3 counties, it would fail at this moment. So where does that leave us in terms of what we're trying to accomplish? Linda and Nikki.
So this is Nikki. I think it's a question for Andrea. Does the proclamation allow the state board to make changes for the April 28th election related to vote centers?
I think the proclamation gives the board broad discretion to implement the alternate voting system of vote by mail in the manner that it sees fit. I think as a matter of transparency and best practice, it makes sense to follow the guideposts provided by the statute, but to identify those areas of the statute to the public and have the board vote on that where the board feels in its discretion that deviation is necessary under the present circumstances. And so to the extent the statute has that requirement of one vote center in each of the counties or each of the jurisdictions in which the special election is taking place, the board does have the authority to say this vote by mail process that we've been ordered by the governor to implement just is incompatible with with the voting center. So on that basis, I believe the board does have that authority. Now, for the reasons I've expressed, I think there's legal risk associated with that, but I understand the heavy decision that the board needs to make on that, and they do have that authority under the proclamation.
This is Mike.
Yeah, this is Bill Welp. So when we are talking, I think there's a few things on the table here where I think we're being asked to change temporarily Comar for I forget, 33-19, whatever it was, stopping, not allowing, not forcing us to make a mailing that we can't do. I get that. And then there's this other thing we're talking about, which is what is being discussed now. Am I correct in that assessment that we've got two things in front of us at the moment?
I think we actually, because of the way, this is Mike, the way that we went into this, I believe what we need is the change to the voter registration deadline, and Nikki and Linda, you confirm me on this. We need to vote on that to change the deadline. We need to vote on adoption of emergency regulations. The last three, the staff has not yet presented us with a certification timeline to approve, and therefore I don't believe that a vote would be appropriate there. The vote centers and the canvass process, there's no proposal by the staff at this point. I know that things have been put out to the field. I know that the board has now expressed its feelings about particularly the vote centers. Both the vote center, the voting and the canvassing, those two items still need to be worked through. You know, if we have an election, no matter what we do about the voting, we have to count the votes. And so we're going to need a way to count the votes. And that's something that obviously the local boards and the state board are working on, trying to come up with a plan to do that safely and within the broad guidelines of public observation. The vote centers is something that is, I think, sort of to the forefront now, and my thinking is now that the board has had an opportunity to discuss this, to set out its thinking, that's something that perhaps the staff can come back to us on at our next meeting, and that would be April 2nd. So, Nikki, Linda, did I state that correctly, or am I off someplace in the field?
This is Linda. The only, Nikki, please chime in. My only concern about postponing any decision about this until next Thursday, is that we absolutely have to continue the plan to hold this election and get things in place, and it takes time. Just a little concern with the delay. But I suppose we'll have more information next week, as Winston put it, it's just going to get worse.
If I may, this is Mike. The change to the deadline and the adoption of regulations, those we'll take care of today. We'll vote on those today. The certification, you have to come back to us with, something concrete, which leaves us with the C and D, vote centers and canvass. I don't think there is a plan on canvassing yet. And as for the vote centers, I think that's what you're talking about in terms of you need something from the board today on that. That be correct?
That would be helpful, yes.
Okay.
Shannon? Excuse me, it's Linda. A, B, and C is what we would like to have board direction on.
Okay. All right. So let me do it in this order if no one objects. The first item we'll consider is the change to voter registration deadline. We'll need a motion on that. What are we looking at as the date on that? I didn't jot anything down on that one.
April 21st.
That's it. Okay. So the chair would entertain a motion to approve the change to voter registration deadline to April 21st, 2020.
For the special election.
For the special election. District 7.
So moved.
This is PJ Hogan, second.
I think Bill seconded. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? None. The voter registration deadline is changed. Item B, adoption of emergency regulations. The chair would entertain a motion to adopt the emergency regulations as set out in the accompanying material, in the material that was provided to the board regarding the COMAR 33.19.02.1A. Do I have such a motion?
Mr. Hogan, so moved.
Malcolm, Fund, second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? The emergency regulations are adopted by the vote of the board. Which brings us to the third item, which is vote centers. I think what I heard the board saying, we've said a number of things, but I believe that the board's position at this point would best be summarized that the board, and please, this is a draft out of my mind, so I'm sure someone else will be able to tweak it and make it sound better and so on. The board opposes establishment of voting centers, but wishes the local boards to adopt measures to allow individuals that require assistance voting to be able to vote. That's broad, but does that make sense?
This is Bill. Can I throw out something here?
Yeah, absolutely.
I have no problem with attempting to put together, for the LBEs to come together with the SBE, try to come up with voting centers for I guess we're talking about both elections here, right? For the April and the June, I guess is what we're discussing.
No. This is only the April. Only April.
Only April. So I would be okay with words like if they, to the extent that it can be done safely and practicably. So if they can find a place and come up with a methodology that protects our workers, our election workers, then I would not have a problem with it. But if they cannot find a way that is both safe and practical, that they wouldn't have to have the 3 voting centers.
This is Mike. I would note that it is my impression that the 3 counties would vigorously oppose voting centers. Period. That's my impression. And if anyone has a different impression from any conversations they've had, please speak up so that we have all information on the table. Hearing nothing.
This is Malcolm. I don't know about 3 of them, but I have heard from one jurisdiction, and they're opposed to that because of the fear of health issues.
Thank you, Malcolm. So, Bill, in answer to your thoughts, I think you will find that the local boards, in considering this, in discussions they've been having with state staff about this, that they are, and I use the word, and Malcolm, I think, agrees with me, they are vigorously opposed to the establishment of these voting centers on the grounds that Malcolm set out. It's the same thing I've heard. It's the same thing we've been talking about, concern for health.
Yeah, and this is Bill again, and I have no problem with that. I'm just trying to find a way that moves towards what Andrea was talking about, yet gives us the flexibility of not having that.
This is Kelly again.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate the information about what everyone has heard from local boards. I haven't heard anything from local boards, and I'm always reluctant to make a decision on the basis of hearsay. So I am inclined to support what Bill is saying, which is that we give the local boards the option to try to do this if they can. And we remind them to pay close attention to directives from the Department of Health. Right now, we're under an order not to have gatherings of 10 or more people, so they need to obey that rule. And of course, if the Board of Health says no gatherings at all, shut them down, then they shut them down. But I would feel better giving the local boards the option to do what they can.
This is P.J. Hogan. I am personally opposed to the idea of the 3 voting centers, but I am willing to give them the option because ultimately they're the ones who are going to know, A, do they have a location, B, are they able to recruit judges and volunteers. And if they don't have a location, they can't recruit the volunteers, so they don't want to put people at risk. I'm willing to leave that to their decision, but I am personally opposed to the 3 voting centers in this time.
This is Malcolm. Kelly, I also think that that's a good suggestion because the frontline people that are the ones that are going to be subject to this should make the ultimate decision. So I would like to leave it in their hands.
I don't want to, P.J. Hogan again, I don't want to mix issues, but we're kind of on the voting right now. Has there been given any thought to ballot drop-offs? Mailboxes that like that's done in other states or other jurisdictions that have done vote by mail. They've set up their own boxes in certain locations for drop-off.
Hi, yes, we are working on implementing that anyway. And the other thing for consideration is that we have the online ballot delivery project, a program where voters can get their ballots electronically, although they still have to mail them back. But they can use their assistive devices on their home computers to mark the ballots.
I mean, that should be, this is PJ again, that should be the solution for the disabled community, shouldn't it?
Don't get me wrong, it certainly is an option and a solution. It just requires people in that community to have access to those that equipment.
I understand, yeah.
So what I think I hear the board saying at this point is that the board is concerned about the health of the voters, volunteers, and the staff, and is giving each of the counties the option to make their decision as to whether they want to stand up a voting center or whether they want to go to an alternative. And I would add, which has to be approved by the administrator.
This is Linda. You really want to leave it up to the counties?
That's what they seem, that is what the board members seem to be saying, is that they want to defer down to there. I think the board has enough information, myself, I'm speaking as a member now. I believe the board has enough information to make the decision. I'm opposed to the voting centers on the grounds that we don't know what it's going to be like on April 28th. We can't protect the public, the volunteers, or the staff, and we are, in all likelihood, going to be able, to some degree, we are going to be a focus, I think locus actually is the best word, of infection for some number of individuals if we have these voting centers. So so there's 3 members that are actually opposed to it, and 2 that would be willing to do otherwise to some degree.
So yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with PJ how he said that. I mean, I am personally opposed to it, for the 4/28 election, it's the only one we're talking about, and it's 2 months to now. I'm just trying to find a way to, not have a whole lawsuit come in over this because and we're trying to keep everybody safe. And if there's no way around it, I could go either way with this. I don't know how you're going to get people and places to do it. So that's why I sent you to can you do it safely and practically? Probably not.
This is Nikki. I know, Mike, that you're trying to keep 4/28 and June separate, and I appreciate that. And I'm just going to say one thing to muddy the waters. I would place money that none of the 3 CD7 counties will, if they're given the choice, would have a vote center on April 28th. I don't have that same level of confidence that all 24 counties on June 2nd would say no. You could have 1 or 2 counties having vote centers, with the rest of them not. And I think that leaving it to the discretion of the counties introduces the possibility that voters in some counties have an option that voters in other counties do not have.
That's a good point. I do want to emphasize that at this moment, the only decisions we're making are relating to the April District 7 elections. And nothing else. Nothing related to the June election, the June primary. And I agree with what Nikki just said, that if we allow each county to, the way I phrased it, if we allow each county to do it, one county maybe one way, one county go the other way. I think I know how all 3 counties are going to go. But my feeling at this point is this. There may be a lawsuit over this. It may happen. But I don't believe that this board should pass this responsibility on to the locals. We have the Maryland Department of Health in this. We have an Assistant Attorney General. There's none of us on this board that are inexperienced about how voting works and how election days are conducted. And we have all the information that anybody's going to have at this moment. We know what we know. What we know is what anybody else would know. Nobody can predict April 28th and how things will be on that day. I believe, as a matter of responsibility, that it should be our decision. It should be on our shoulders. So,
as long as we're, I'm hearing some conflicting things here. This is Bill. Nikki, are you expecting us that we would do it the same way for April and June, or are you trying to put the 2 together right now?
Thank you. So, Nikki, so I'm not trying to put the 2 together. I just think, are you directly or indirectly setting a precedent by a decision in April? Now, obviously facts can change, but we have only 1 week to submit a plan for June. And so I just wanted the board to be thinking about, if you make a decision one way in April, would there be a reason to have a different decision in June, or is that a precedent that you move forward with?
This is CJ. I don't think it's precedent setting in this particular situation. I mean, look, every couple days the governor issues executive orders and some change things. And I don't think we can be bound, or people can be bound, people can expect us to be bound by a decision we're making right now for the events. April 28th is far enough away, but June 2nd is a long way away. We could be in a worse situation by then, or we could be in a better situation, but I'm not prepared to make any decision about June 2nd at this point. I understand and am sympathetic to the requirement that we submit a report to the governor on April 3rd, how we're going to run the June 2nd election, but I think he would also be sympathetic to the changing circumstances.
Okay, thank you.
and this is Malcolm. I agree with TJ, and what we do today, we're not necessarily setting a precedent for the circumstances and the situation tomorrow. Because of the circumstances, we're making decisions today that we never thought that we would be making the last time we had our meeting. And in addition to that, if things get worse, everything we decide may be eradicated because we may come out with another executive order and nobody may be locked down like they have in Italy and the way New York City is going. So I think we need to look at the situation today with the facts that we have on hand today and consider June the 2nd as we get closer to that.
Well, this is Linda. June the 2nd is a mere week away from the April election, or less than a week. And the next item on the agenda is the comprehensive plan for the June election, and that includes vote centers. So whatever you decide for the April 28th election, 29th, 30th, 4 days later, seems to me relevant.
Hey, this is Mike, and I understand what you're saying, but I think what this comes down to is it's sort of the old story. If somebody says, tell me what you're going to do next week, and the answer is, tell me what next week looks like, and then I'll tell you what I'm going to do. So the governor needs a plan, and we all understand that, and we do need to put a plan out. But at this point, I think the plan would be different in the sense that there's the estimates that we're seeing look different for June. Now, having said that, Mr. Yee, are you still there?
I am.
Let's since we're kind of merging a little bit into this, what can you tell us about what the health department thinks the situation will look like in June, late June?
Sure. Based on our internal modeling, based on the modeling from Hopkins and Maryland, and also if you guys, and I can send a link to Nikki or Linda to send to all of you folks, there's a lot of publicly available statistical sites. Maryland is more or less tracking the middle of the pack of all 50 states with respect to coronavirus infections, like the rate of increase. New York State, for example, is way above, and then states like Nebraska are way below. So Maryland's kind of in the middle of the pack right now. We're expecting this to be peaking probably around 4th of July. So that's probably when it gets the worst, and then it'll peak. If that happens, that means we'll have done our job because we will have slowed down hospital capacity demands. If we get a sudden spike in the next 2 weeks, that probably means we haven't done our job and we're going to be overwhelmed. It makes it easier, arguably, for you all because then you'll be able to plan an election to some degree. But all kidding aside, we realistically believe that we'll still be in a very serious situation on June 2nd. And so at least right now, our advice is to minimize, it's the same advice as before, to minimize congregation of people. And the reason why we say that is we're trying to do everything we can to not be Italy, where you have a complete national lockdown and a breakdown of social order to some degree. And then the last question, just in case you folks were wondering, we have a little bit less than 200,000 masks in the state supply right now. We're not getting much resupply from the feds. And that's 200,000 masks for 6.3 million right now. And of course, the health folks that are directly dealing with coronavirus are the ones that are going to be allocated that first, I think. Then maybe first responders if we have enough. And then if we can limit the number of election centers, we will do everything we can to try to provide equipment for the June election. But it's going to be really rough. And I think the initial estimate, as the staff and I were trying to discuss over the weekend, on average there's 20,000 various poll workers for any given election. We do not have that much equipment. There's just no way we can produce that much equipment, and not deprive the hospitals of that protective equipment. So we would strongly suggest if you adopt a mailbox type solution, that's probably one good solution. If you minimize and spread out the voters through an early voting center, you decrease the amount of foot traffic. And then we would strongly suggest for election day to do everything in your power to just make it you can drop off the ballots or you can mail in your ballots. Just because election day traditionally has lots of people all showing up at the same place at the same time. Anything you can do to spread people out so that they come in with some intervals, you reduce the ability for this infection to jump to multiple people at the same time. Happy to take questions.
This is PJ. We haven't even raised this, but let's just say you had early voting or you had voting centers on election day. I guarantee you're going to have some campaigns that want to have campaign workers out in front of those voting centers. That just draws more people. I just think I'm now going to reverse my earlier comments about giving the authority to the counties. I just think voting centers are a bad idea in this situation.
Yeah, this is Bill Velp. After hearing the July 4th peak and seeing that we would beat it in June, I also would come down the side of not having voting centers. Somebody brought up earlier, what if you did somebody who had needed assistance in voting and wanted to come? Could the county set up a by appointment thing for that, or would that be too cumbersome, Vicki or Linda?
Well, that's not something that we've asked the counties about. So at this point, I'd just be guessing their answers. I can't answer that. Sorry. Yeah. This is Nikki, by the way.
Okay, this is Mike. Linda, I think you have your answer as to what direction the June 20th plan should look at.
June 2nd.
Yeah, June 2nd, whatever. 20th, 22nd, whatever. The June election. This is why I can't be trusted with dates. The June election. In a sense, June will mirror or very much resemble what we learned from the April election. And based on the reaction of some of the board members and the Department of Health's, I know, quote, strongly recommended suggestions, that we're going to be interested in looking a lot like the April election, the District 7 election. So I think that's the guidance for how June should look. And I think that we're going to learn things from April, and what we learned from April, we would apply over time. I can't imagine that the governor is going to get a plan on June 3rd and say, okay, that's what you got to stick with. You can't change it. That makes no sense. It makes no sense generally, and it makes no sense with this governor. So I think that you have your answer, that it's going to mirror April.
So this is Bill Bell. Just to mirror back to you, Mike, pardon me, but I just want to make sure that what we're saying is concurrent that the board would not have voting centers for either the April special election or the June primary. Is that
correct?
Yeah, okay.
That's what I think we're hearing. That's what I'm hearing. I emphasize it's my perspective between the Department of Health and comments that other members have made. Let me remind you, if we are thinking in the terms for the April election, terms of controlling infection, complying with what the health department is trying to get everybody to do, and minimizing contacts and so on. The very things we've been discussing over the course of this meeting. If that's what we're focused on at this level, then when we get to what the health department now thinks will be the peak period of infection, would we be likely to loosen things up? And I suspect not. I suspect they wouldn't want us to either. Actually, I know they would. So, yeah, I think that what we're trying to do for April, in conformance with the governor's proclamation, the recommendations of the Department of Health, of contributing to try to flatten the curve, and at this level of infection, then when you're looking at higher, with peaking, the infection rate peaking, I don't see us becoming more open in terms of the election process. I think I can't imagine a scenario that we've got high rates of infection and I'll encourage people to congregate. We, the board, on election, in terms of elections. So that would be my response to your thought. Anybody else?
Is that something we need to vote on, or is that direction they can go to bring us something to vote on next week?
Linda, what's your preference on that? I mean, you know what the board's going to do at this point.
Well, I think in order to have something binding, you need a vote. We need some time to flesh out the plan for next week. So if you don't vote on it until Thursday, to the governor's office on Friday, that doesn't give us much time, and the staff is really tired.
So what you're saying is you'd like us to vote now?
I would, yes.
Okay, that's fine. All right. Does anyone else have any further thoughts or comments about this matter that we have under discussion? Okay, hearing none. I believe, based on what I've heard board members say, that the chair would accept a motion that the counties be directed, and this can be changed, guys, the counties be directed that in the April and June elections that voting centers will not be utilized, that vote by mail will be emphasized, and that we are open to accommodations for individuals, and I stress the word individual, meaning a small number of people, who require some assistance in voting. Does that count? Yeah, absolutely.
Mike, I'm going to jump in here. This is Andrea Trento from the AG's office.
Yeah.
The problem with lumping those two votes together is that the governor's proclamation gives substantial discretion to the board to implement the vote by mail election for April 28th. With regard to the primary election that got postponed to June 2nd, it's just a postponement of the primary election. Now, the governor anticipates that we're going to submit a comprehensive plan, but to the extent that, and it's not clear to me, and I need to work with the governor's office on this, but to the extent that something more from the governor's office is needed with regard to the comprehensive plan that gets submitted to the governor's office, in other words, if the governor needs to promulgate a similar alternate voting system order that he did with regard to the April election, then then it's just there's a difference in what authority the board actually has with regard to how the elections will transpire. You can vote that at this point you want the comprehensive plan. You're directing that the staff, in preparing the comprehensive plan for the board to vote on next week, do so in a manner that focuses on vote by mail and eliminates the use of voting centers, but it's different than the April election in the sense that you do have the authority to order that with regard to the April election, have it actually be the case, if I'm making myself clear.
You are, actually, and I see the distinction. So we have two separate votes, we have two separate motions. The first one is directive is an order which tells the counties what we're going to do in April. The second is a directive to the staff to prepare a plan for the governor's consideration, which is consistent with what we've done in the District 7 election. Did I restate it correctly?
I think that's right.
Okay. I'm so tempted to borrow a line from the movies, let it be written, let it be done. But let's do it one at a time then. First item, as to the April, the statement, see, I've done it again. The chair will entertain a motion to direct counties involved in the Congressional 7 special election that they will not have voting centers and that they are asked to develop plans to be submitted back as to accommodating other voters with disabilities who need assistance. Does that, board members, does that comply? Anybody have any thoughts on that? No.
Well, while you were talking, I was trying to draft something that I guess I wanted to be more specific. I came up with this. I don't know if this answers the question on the one vote there. I move that in light of the state of emergency and catastrophic health emergency declared by the governor March 17th, that the April 21st 7th District election not have voting centers.
Okay. Do we want to add something in about...
Is that too simple?
Simple is good, actually.
I think that's perfect.
But do we want to say anything about accommodating? At least it leaves it open. We're not going to have voting centers, but do we want to add something to that in there? Not directive in the sense of you will do it, but so we just don't have information at this moment. Maybe we should just stick with what Malcolm has written. Anybody, any other thoughts?
In light of what Webster indicated in the situation, that's why I wanted to keep it just plain and just not have voting centers, because we don't want to get not only voters but the workers to congregating and spreading the virus.
Okay, but I'm good with what you wrote, but I guess I'm questioning back. Should we even be asking the boards if they can come up with accommodations for disabled voters, persons who need assistance? And the answer to that may be that we've left that door open. Andrea, do we leave that door open with Malcolm's motion?
You've left it open, but you haven't required it. A local board or the state board wouldn't be required to develop a plan of that nature, absent a directive from the state board to do so. So it's just with the order to not have voting centers. There's no obligation on the locals or on the state board staff to propose an alternative.
Linda, how would it work if we added on to what Malcolm wrote, something to the effect of, and the counties are directed to provide to the state board a plan for accommodating voters who need assistance? Or we could even put in the feasibility of a plan, and if feasible, a plan for accommodating those voters.
Malcolm, would that be the local board's responsibility or the state board's responsibility? You know, my motion was specifically for the April 21st 7th district election.
Yes, that's Mike. The local boards are the ones that have to figure this out. I mean, certainly the state board can, you know, staff can engage back and forth with, you know, resources that are, they don't know about. I mean, there could be any number of reasons. But at the end of the day, and I think Bill would agree with us, having actually run this stuff himself, they have to figure out how to run this thing. So I don't want to tell them, you've got to do this, but I also don't want to just leave the community that needs these kinds of assistance, you know, just hanging out at the end of a branch. I would like to ensure that we move this forward. You know, come back to us by next week, either tell us if it's feasible, and if it's feasible, how are you going to do it? And then, you know, we go from there.
Okay.
So, any thoughts or comments about what we've hammered out so far?
This is Kelly again, and I'm struggling to understand what would be the alternative to vote centers. Are you suggesting that the local boards create teams of election judges who travel around in vans with ballot marking devices going into people's homes? I don't see how that is safe.
I'm actually saying that I'm saying, and speaking as a member now, that I'm merely saying, hey, let's see if the local boards can come up with a feasible plan for this. And they may say, look, we can rent this office space, and we can arrange for people to come in by appointment, and, you know, we'll be minimal in exposure and so on, and perhaps the people who wrote us that long letter will have brought forward a number of volunteers who are going to assist in that project, and, you know, we can staff it and you know, make it work. Or they may come back and they may say, we don't see a way to do it without increasing the risk to people. We've got no PPE. We don't have disinfectants that we're going to need to clean the machines each time. You know, we can't do it. And so...
Yeah, what you just described to me, this is Kelly again, renting a space and having appointments, that sounds like a vote center, but by appointments only. So if you ban the vote centers, then how can we do vote centers by appointment only? I just don't see any alternative that they could come up with, and that would be safer than a vote center.
Well, I think I'm using the term vote centers as sort of like early voting centers, as places that people could come to and, you know, do whatever they needed to do, and it would be, and so I'm using voting centers in that sense. As to the what I just described as a possible alternative, I don't see that as a voting center. I see that as an extension of the local office. It's the equivalent of saying you can come into the local office and take care of business at the local office. I don't see it as a voting center. That would be my distinction.
Okay.
Well,
I probably said too much.
Well, this is Malcolm. Would it help if I stated in the motion, take our voting centers and replace it with in-person voting? In other words, I move that in light of the state of emergency and catastrophic health emergency declared by the governor March 17th, that the April 15th 7th district election not have in-person voting. And that's basically what the governor said in his declaration. He says an alternate voting by mail.
Okay, this is Kelly again. If we ban in-person voting, we are banning the use of the ballot marking device. Am I correct on that?
Well, if you look at the proclamation, Roman numeral 2, he says that the State Board of Elections shall utilize as an alternative voting system voting by mail. It's more or less telling us that we set up voting by mail as an alternative voting system, and an alternative to our voting system now is in person and ballot marking devices, and he says as an alternative to that, we have voting by mail. The governor has directed us, from what I can see from the proclamation.
This is
Andre, what do you say?
Malcolm, you're right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, you're right in the sense that the proclamation just says voting by mail. There is a statute that discusses voting by mail that contemplates voting centers. So you could read the proclamation in a way that it's just intended to incorporate the conventional voting by mail processes that both the statutes contemplate and other jurisdictions have contemplated and implemented, which involve also the use of voting centers. Or you could interpret that more broadly just to say the governor has has ordered the state board to conduct the election by a vote by mail and left a lot of blanks for the state board to fill in. If that does include the use of voting centers, then the state board in its discretion can decide that. If the state board doesn't wish to use voting centers, the state board can also do that as well. I don't read the governor's proclamation as requiring one or the other.
Thanks a lot, Andre.
There may be other sources of law that would require some form of in-person voting. I've discussed those, but I'm looking narrowly at the proclamation.
And the proclamation, this is Malcolm, the proclamation is in reference to a state of emergency. And I would think if you have a state of emergency and a declaration, that overrides anything else that's previously existing.
Like the Constitution?
Actually, in some instances,
we're still allowing voting. The Constitution doesn't specify specific ways of voting. They just say you have to vote. So we are still voting. So it's not.
I understand. And I'm just that was not a fair remark, and I apologize for that.
I think we're all getting a little giddy over this now.
Yeah, I think so. Okay. Let me ask our technical staff, if you will. Linda, Nikki, you're hearing this motion. You understand where we're trying to go on this thing, I think, to the degree that any of us do. Do you have thoughts about whether there needs to be anything in there for this to focus on, can we accommodate? I'm asking from a technical perspective, a perspective of what you've heard from the counties about what they feel they can or cannot do. Not from a broad perspective, not from a legal perspective, just a small technical aspect of what you've heard from them, what they believe they can and cannot do.
Nikki, feel free to chime in. This is Linda. They do not want to have person-to-person interactions on voting.
Okay. All right. Then, I think Malcolm's original motion captures that. And unless someone feels differently about that.
You say, Mrs. Malcolm, you say the original said voting center, and I changed it to in-person voting. Which one?
In-person voting. I think that's what, I believe that's what Linda was saying, in effect.
Yeah.
Well, I think she actually used those words. All right, so that's how the motion would look. Is there any further discussion on this motion?
Should I restate the motion?
Sure.
Do I move that I move that in light of the state of emergency and catastrophic health emergency declared by the governor March the 17th, that the April 21st 7th District elections not have in-person voting.
April 28th, isn't it?
April 28th, yeah.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, sorry, April 28th. Right, April 28th. Where did I get 21st from?
Malcolm, you just did that to make me look better, that's all. Because I always get the date screwed up.
Malcolm, you got it from the voter registration deadline, I think.
Yes, because I was reading something here on the, that's right, because I made a notation of that on the agenda. You're right. Vote by mail election, 4/28, and 4/21st is the, April 21st is the deadline for registering. Yeah, you're right.
This is P.J. Hogan. I second the motion.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All opposed? None. Motion carries. Second item. As I recall, that would be what, D? D. No. It would be actually part of item number 6. So, if there's no objection, I think we'll just move directly to item number 6 at this point. We've already basically discussed it. And
point of information here, weren't we supposed to give some direction or not? Did I misunderstand that for the June election as well?
That's what I'm proposing to do right now.
Okay.
So when we split it up, we're now finished with the April election. We're now looking at the June election, and we've had Mr. Yee's health department, Maryland Health Department Health, estimate about where the infection rate would be and so on and so forth. Linda indicated that everybody needs us to provide, I guess, firm guidance as to the June election. So I'll open the floor for any further discussion on that.
This is Linda. Do you need Nikki to describe the proposed plan that in consultation with the health department that we developed? Very briefly.
Sure, I think it'd be good.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, this is PJ. Just before we move to item 6, I just have a couple, I think, quick questions that can be answered. And this is regarding the April 28th 7th Congressional District election. Will the vote by mail be postage prepaid?
Yes.
Okay. How will the votes be counted? I guess I was holding these questions for D, the canvass process.
The canvassing, yeah.
So I'm not sure what you mean. So counted centrally at each county. The mechanics of what that looks like, we're working with the guys on that. We were, last night, the Howard County Board of Elections distributed some draft processes and procedures to look at to how that would actually mechanically work with the social distancing procedures that are in place. So I'm not sure the how question today is. It'll be on existing equipment we have, either the high-speed scanners or the DS200s.
How many high-speed scanners do we have?
Yeah, so the Howard County has 1, and Baltimore County and Baltimore City have 2, and they have asked for more. So we just asked that question today, and they indicated that they would like more. So we're figuring out we
have more high-speed scanners spread around the state, correct?
Right. So that was the first.
That we could move over to Howard County, Baltimore City, Baltimore County to scan the ballots in a high-speed fashion? That's my question.
Yes, and that's something we'll be looking at with the other counties that have them that don't have the April election to see if we can move them. We have one in our office. There's an extra one in the state too. So yes, that's something we're looking at.
One last question, and I should know the answer to this question. How do we verify that the ballot received is from, PJ Hogan, my address? Is it signature?
This is Nikki. A signature is required, and the date is used to verify that it was, if there's no postmark.
But the signature is how we verify that it was me that voted that ballot and not someone else?
The current absentee voting process verifies, just looks to see that the absentee oath is signed, looks for a signature.
Question though, when they sign that, aren't they in essence signing like an affidavit that this is who they are and that's what they're voting on, and if we find out otherwise they can be prosecuted?
Correct.
Yes, this is Kelly. I think we have no way to check to be sure that the person who signed it, because we're not actually looking at the signatures, are we? When we just look that there's a signature, we don't compare the signatures. And in vote by mail states, I think they use software to compare the signatures.
This is Mike. I believe you're right. That was one of the safeguards they had to build into it. Our problem is that we are not a vote by mail state, and so we have no real safeguards built into it. It's going to be less of a question for the April election and more of a question for the June election, I think.
Well, we haven't, this is Kelly again, we haven't decided to do vote by mail in June yet, have we?
We've not, well, no, because we started to move to the June plan, and then we kind of came back to canvassing, and now we're sort of shifting a little bit more.
Right.
So, to try to keep this moving, PJ, your questions are answered, is that correct?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So, as I recall, the canvas process and the certification time frame, Linda, if I'm correct about so Nikki, we're not voting on those two things. Is that correct? Today.
That's correct. Just a sort of heads up and have the discussion to alert you that we will probably be coming back with some requests later.
Got it. Okay, which we've now discussed those, and I'm considering that agenda item 5 has been completed, and we're now on agenda item 6, the comprehensive plan for June 2nd elections. So, I believe Linda suggested that, Nikki, that you address that.
Sure. So one of the documents that we submitted before the meeting was the plan that we developed in conjunction with the Maryland Department of Health and based on advice from the Office of the Attorney General, probably superseded by your discussion today, but it was to send ballots to all eligible voters. During early voting, voters can drop off ballots or vote in person at early voting centers. On election day, voters will be able to drop off ballots at designated locations.
Okay. It is a fairly bare bones description here. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts about it
mean, what does that, if we can't do voting centers for April, how are we going to do voting centers for? So how do we even do early voting? What's the thinking?
Again, when we heard the health department's recommendation, what the health department, I believe, would most like not to see is clusters of people, people clumping up. Probably would not like to see our elections people, sitting in a room and dealing with, all these people coming through. That's sort of an informal summary, but I think that's a fair summary. So the real key is we have to give this thing something to the governor on the 3rd. And the question is, what are we going to give to him? And that's what it's on the agenda for. And the idea there was that or the idea was, at least at one point, that June is going to mirror the April, because if anything, the health institute are telling us that the situation may well be worse. So that's, I think, where we are right now.
But the document is, Bill again, I'm sorry. The document that's up in front of us says the governor, that the plan, grapple is number 2, during early vote. Voters can drop off ballots or vote in person at early voting centers. And I'm asking how we're going to pull that off based on not being able to have people congregate with more than 10 people. Who's going to work it?
This is Nikki. So I think the framework for this plan was an assumption that it was the legal argument that Andrea posed, that we have to have in-person voting. And so then this is where the health department said, well, this is then how we recommend you doing that. If the state board applies its action from April to June, then the framework and the suggestion by the Department of Health would look different. I'm not sure Webster's still on the phone. I think he had to jump off, but if you're there, Webster, I'll shut up and you can speak for yourself. Okay. So I think their recommendation would likely change in light of the board's position about we're not having vote centers.
This is Malcolm. I got the impression that the officials from the health department today provided a worse situation, perhaps, to address. And that's, okay. And what is your name again?
Webster Health Department. Sorry about that. I got kicked out by phone.
I got the impression that what you told us today and the algorithm that's being used shows a worse situation coming up. And I could be wrong, because you should never make assumptions, but I got the impression that when this emergency protocol document was proposed, that perhaps the information that you provided to us was not as forthcoming to the people that came up with this document. Am I correct? I mean, situation's gotten worse since this was proposed, and it seems like it's going to get worse. So some of the things that are in here may not be applicable to what we have come up with in the last day or two. Am I wrong?
The options that are presented to you, sir, are basically options. The board staff, and obviously Linda, please correct me, Ms. Lamone, Ms. Charleston, myself, and the rest of the board staff work together to give you your major options, and the board staff gave their recommendations as to what are the potential issues, potential solutions, and they honestly wanted to give you folks as much information so you can make your decision. I sent around, to answer your question about whether it gotten worse or not, I sent to Ms. Lamone about 20 minutes ago, I think now, a document. I think Mr. Hogan got it. I don't have the rest of your emails. If you can, if Linda, if you could forward it to them, they can take a look. This is publicly available data from Johns Hopkins, and it shows basically a trend line. The second graph shows a trend line of coronavirus cases by U.S. states. And if you pull up Maryland, we're kind of tracking the trend line pretty closely. As we expand towards 20 days and 30 days out, we'll see how well we do. Hopefully, all the preventive measures that every Marylander has taken over the past 10 days will be good and will be below the trend line. If people don't pay attention and this infection keeps on growing, we'll be above the trend line. We do not want to be New York or New Jersey or Michigan, basically. And we want to be closer towards Nebraska.
Okay, Seth Malcolm again. Okay, thank you. I see this document was produced March the 20th. That was 5 days ago. And I guess what I'm saying is a lot has occurred in 5 days. So that you still stand by the solutions that you have listed in this document of 5 days ago.
I think, sir, the main point was the board staff wanted to give you your options, and then if you all wanted to ask questions about specific options, we can go through it. All the options are on the table. Obviously, the health department's recommendation is, whenever possible, folks should practice social distancing, and we should promote policy solutions that do not encourage the congregation of people and then the dispersal of those people to infect other people. So while I don't think we can tell you what to do, we're strongly suggesting that you just keep in mind those public health principles.
Okay, I appreciate that. Before my wife passed, I've been married for 49 years, and I learned to always do what I was told, but that has nothing to do with this.
This is Bill speaking. Question for maybe Nikki and Linda. Do you feel that we can safely and practically have early voting with early voting centers for the June election? Is that safe and practical? Is there a way to do that?
This is Nikki. I think it's certainly challenged by the fact that there's no equipment that we can provide to the poll workers to reduce their exposure. I mean, that's based on what Webster told us earlier today, and he had told us before, that those measures that would reduce the likelihood are unlikely to exist. And I share your concerns about poll workers and increasing their risk. The counties have been surveying them, and at this point there's about, I think it's a 40-odd% vacancy rate for early voting and a 20% vacancy rate for election day. And I think certainly the expectation is that those numbers are going to continue to increase.
Yeah.
So without poll workers, we can't do it. And that's the simple answer. The poll workers that we have who are now saying they can, we can't provide them with equipment to maximize their safety.
If I may, this is Bill again. It's a challenging situation because it's easy to be out there in, the end of May or in the middle of June on a June 28 day and say, why didn't y'all think it's all going to be over? Or this is all but today as we sit, we don't have equipment. We got a 40% vacancy rate and climbing. I mean, today it's hard to say we're going to do something in June based on the situation we're in. I don't know how you all feel, but that's a very precarious situation. It's always easy to look backwards. Hard to look forward.
This is PJ, if I may. This document lays out a number of different options. I realize that it's due June 3rd. I realize we're not meeting again until, April 3rd. I realize we're not meeting again until April 2nd. But April 2nd is a week away. I actually think we're going to know more even in a week. I think to make decisions today is a little premature. I think we've got a week, and we're going to know more in a week. We're not going to know everything about what June 2nd is going to look like, but we're going to be 1 week closer.
This is Mike. Nikki, looking at the plan, which is kind of certainly brings them to the point. Excuse me. Do you expect how much more detail do you expect to have with what you said to the governor?
So I think being able to articulate some of the realities in which the elections world is operating right now, with voting locations closed, with poll workers quitting, I think providing the context of the world now precedes whatever the recommendation is. And we talked with Webster about maybe including some of the public health information that's available to us when we write it, because I think both of those groups of information inform the recommendation. So whether the recommendation is really fleshed out more than this, I don't know, but I think there's more context that surrounds the recommendation to justify whatever the decision is. And I appreciate the information is changing every day. If there is guidance that you as a board can provide now, that certainly helps move the writing process along than waiting for the second to write something that's due on the 3rd. Unless it is just a letter, one-page letter with just this kind of thing. I think it might be difficult to provide the context and just start that writing on the 2nd.
This is Mike. I agree with you that context, if for no other reason to complete the record, we need to set out what we're faced with at this point in the decision cycle. And so I think I think providing the context, it's not going to tell the governor anything he doesn't already know, but it's going to tell him what we know and what we based our thinking on. If he's got better information or different information, hopefully better, then I'm sure he won't be too shy in responding to us and saying, no, I think we can do more than that, or whatever it might be. So context, I think, is extremely important, if for no other reason than to inform him of what we understand the situation to be. And then he has some way to measure why we've done what we've done or haven't done. Now, this does have an alternative. It says you can do this, or you can draw both ballots or vote in person. Do we need to provide something more definitive than that to the governor right now?
You mean right now, like today, or you mean next Friday?
Next Friday. Next Friday.
I'm happy to address that if anybody wants to hear my view.
Go ahead, Andrea. It's Linda.
Hi, this is Andrea Trent with AAG. I think this is, as I understood it, and I think Nikki's made this clear, but I mean, this is a broad outline of a plan that the staff has presented to the board as the staff's recommendation based on the advice they've received from the Department of Health and the advice they've received from the Attorney General's office, understanding that, perhaps the board's decision on the vote centers in the special election might affect the board's view of this plan. But setting that aside for now, this is the broad outline of a recommended plan from the staff that, the board's views on at this still planning stage, I think would be greatly appreciated by the staff. If there's something in this broad outline of a plan that the board thinks is in the wrong direction, then I think the staff needs to hear that, because they need to be able to prepare an alternative that would be to the satisfaction of the board in advance of the April 2nd meeting, so that if changes need to be made at the margins, that's certainly doable, but it's much harder at that stage to rewrite the plan in advance of April 3rd. But in terms of the detail that ultimately the April 3rd plan would present, I suspect, and I don't want to speak for Linda and Nikki and their staff, but I suspect that the detail will include whatever degree of specificity building out this broad outline is possible at that time, but we'll have to acknowledge and have to explain to the governor that this is a work in progress, and this is our plan as we're moving forward with it, but the details still need to be filled in many areas. And so I don't expect, and I don't think it was the board's or the staff's expectation that this outline would be the level of detail that would be presented to the governor and just have some context about the health situation we find ourselves in. One thing I'd add is, to the extent that the plan that ultimately gets proposed to the governor.
Nikki, this is Erin. Natasha emailed me and said that the video ends at 4:30, so she's going to have to create another video stream soon. So I'm sure she's working on it.
Yep, they are working on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
We suspend because it's supposed to be a public meeting until it comes back up, or do we continue?
Andrea?
Do we have an idea of how long that might take?
Can I just propose that we wait maybe 5 minutes and see?
I would prefer.
That works for me. Okay, 5-minute recess.
So before we do that, this is Linda. I just wanted to point out that the plan that we, quote unquote, we presented, we simply have not had time to flesh it out. And Nikki has been taking responsibility for this, and she has been super, super busy. So we do have a little bit more thoughts that are going to go into this.
I've just been told that it's back on.
That was quick enough. Okay, so we are still discussing the comprehensive plan for the June 2nd, 2020 elections. And more thoughts? Who else wants to address this?
I have another question. This is Bill, if I could. So somebody could have either voting experience in early voting, but election day would be drop-off ballot only and not at every precinct. Was that the general idea here? It would be X number of designated locations to be X less than the amount of precincts they would have normally had.
Yeah, I think that was the context, certainly. I think Webster earlier talked about election day as our busier day, and so try to reduce the personal contact that day and offer drop-off boxes. I think it would be very challenging for us to have certainly a permanently affixed, unattended mailbox at every polling place. So something less than the number of polling places. But right, to be determined where, how many. We talked about, well, could we use fire stations? Could we use libraries that have the book return drops? Could we use schools where they're doing meal pickups. There are places that have an infrastructure, but then there's also the other thing to consider is that if a county has 100 drop-off spots, I'm just making it up, that means that somebody has to go by every one of those and pick them up. Not just the ballots, but the mailbox later, or if it's a portable box, then it has to be staffed. So we're back into the same pickle that we have with using election judges now to monitor drop-off spots. Now, there's less interaction involved there, but we would need a human being. So there are logistics involved that impact, I think, the number of locations.
Can anybody hear me?
Yep.
Yes?
Yes. Okay. There was a weird sound and Nikki stopped talking and I thought it was cut out.
This is Phil again. I'd like to throw out that I'm envisioning having to take, across the state 1 million ballots and have to then run them all through scanners and check them all. And I'm wondering if we're going to be able to make the dates. Should part of our presentation also have some type of relief on the back end when we come out with final results?
Yes, we will need relief on the back end on the certification. We expect to need it in April, but certainly know we're going to need it in June. And that would be part of the plan. Or as Andrea said, if we put in the plan recommended or needed language in a proclamation, that would certainly be one of them.
One thing on that issue about extending the canvas and the timeline for certification of results. One thing the governor's proclamation does authorize the board to do, there's a Roman 3 in the proclamation states that all other statutory and regulatory dates and time periods relating to the primary election or special general election may be additionally postponed in the discretion of the State Board of Elections to conform to this order. So something like how you process the results of the primary election, to the extent there are deadlines involved, this order already gives the board authority to just extend those.
That's great.
Thank you, Andrea. Anyone else? Okay, Linda, do you want a vote saying that, we are favorably inclined towards this plan? Is that what you want at this point?
Well, I'd like to have direction from the board so that we can work on it. This is Linda. In light of your vote on the other issue, do you want us to continue to have in-person voting on primary election day?
Or early voting.
Or early voting?
Sorry, it's Nikki.
Yeah, sorry.
Doris, thoughts?
Well, this is Mark. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Malcolm, you go please.
Okay. Since, as I mentioned earlier, this is an initial document, and it's constantly evolving as issues take place and different circumstances come up. I would just recommend that we go with what we have, and you guys continue to work on it as you before you present it to the governor.
This is PJ. With respect to early voting and voting centers for the June 2nd primary, I think that should be an option, but to be determined at a later date. I'm not, it's like I'm just as strident as I was about deciding not to have voting centers from the April 28th election. I'm not there yet for the June 2nd just because of circumstances may change. I think the board, the agency staff, and the local board need to plan for the greatest possibility, but that may that changes as we get closer.
This is Nikki, if I may. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we've been thinking about, we've been backing up all of these steps that we have to do, and there's sort of two big things that take a fair amount of time, and it's probably just one now. It's either the sample ballot or it's the vote by mail ballots, right? If we do vote by mail, we don't need a sample ballot. But the content of that ideally should include what are your options for returning this ballot. And if it isn't, in-person is an option, then that is just the simplest way to reach all the voters to say, these are your options. You can go in person, you can drop off, here are the drop-offs. And the vote by mail ballots to get out for the June 2nd election is targeted to be going out, it's the last full week of April. And so I appreciate, right, things are changing, but at some point we have to make a decision because the train's got to leave the station, either with a sample ballot or with a vote by mail ballot. And so we sort of in our head thought the April 3rd date was a good date because that really is a point where we need to make decisions and move forward. And if it's in-person early voting, we need to get those facilities back open for the day or the days. There are a lot of things that have to happen. And so I don't know that we have perhaps as much time as we would obviously like to have.
Yeah, this is Bill. Nikki, thank you. And let me just say, because I haven't said it yet, how much I know we all appreciate how hard all of y'all are working, and very much appreciate that. I know how difficult it is, and the curveballs are not easy, and they come daily here. So I'm still having trouble based on what we are told about the July 4th peak of even finding early voting centers that are going to be available to us. I mean, all the libraries are closed, the schools are closed. Are they going to open them back up for us for early voting?
Well, I think this is Nick. I think the governor has that authority to do that if that is what the recommendation is.
And you believe that there is a way that we can effectively and safely administer early voting with a line that may show up trying to keep everybody 6 feet apart. You think there's a way to do that? Election day should be drop-off ballots. I'm 100% with you on that, because that's just going to be mayhem. At that point, it's not. But if you believe we can do it safely and effectively for early voting, whether in person or drop-off, I'd be willing to look at that plan because you guys created it and I trust you.
This is Nikki. I think the drop-off is much easier to accomplish safely. I think I stated earlier my concerns with in-person voting as well, without, as Webster said, the ability to provide the protective equipment to reduce the risk to our poll workers and our judges. I don't have anything to add to what I've already said, is that without the equipment, there is a great risk to our poll workers and our voters.
Well, I mean, based on that, I would say that we shouldn't have in-person voting for the June election. I know I hear PJ and I don't disagree, but if we have to I'm okay with waiting a week, but if our drop dead date is 4/3 to tell the governor, I can't vote to put our people in harm's way without equipment. I don't know how y'all feel, but that seems to me.
This is Malcolm. I agree. I definitely don't want to subject persons to a health issue, and we've already heard that equipment will not be available to protect them, and it'll be worse than what it is today by that time.
This is Mike. Mr. Yee, are you still on the phone call?
I think so. Am I?
You are. One question. Yeah, sometimes we make statements or we ask questions for the record. This is one of those times. As of June, prior to June, late May and into June 2nd, does the Department of Health anticipate that we will have sufficient personal protection equipment for use by poll workers?
At the current moment, cannot assure the board of that fact. I don't think we can confidently assure healthcare workers or first responders of that situation on Wednesday, March the 25th. The situation is extremely critical, and the national stockpile is being drawn down at a very rapid pace, and the Maryland stockpiles are being drawn down at an extremely rapid pace. The Secretary, as evidence of that, the Secretary just issued an order on Monday requiring all healthcare practitioners in Maryland to follow the CDC guidelines for conserving personal protective equipment, and that means strategies such as reusing masks, limiting older practitioners and healthcare providers from coronavirus-infected patients, and a couple other strategies that the CDC recommends.
Thank you, sir. All right, so we're not appreciably in a different, my perspective is we're not in an appreciably different position in June than we are we say June, and election day is June, but the early voting would slip into late May. So we're not in a position late May or early June than we are in late April for practical purposes and planning purposes. So I think it comes down to drop off ballots if we're consistent with what we did with April. Or mail them, obviously. Anyone with thoughts? Okay. For purposes...
This is Kelly.
Go, Kelly.
I was just going to say, we're sending ballots to every eligible voter for the June 2nd primary. Absentee voting is a form of early voting, so it seems like opening up early voting centers is kind of duplicate. The only thing that we might want to consider is having some voting centers, at least one somewhere, to accommodate the small number of people who do need to vote in person. And if we have a plan where we're going to send ballots to every eligible voter, and then we're going to have voting centers open just on election day, just a few of those, very small number of them. We could always drop that plan to have voting centers if the situation was actually getting worse. And then that would at least give us the option. I mean, having early voting seems redundant to me. If everybody's voting by absentee ballot, having an early voting center seems redundant. We don't need that because everybody's got an absentee ballot, and an absentee ballot is a form of early voting. It's just not in person. The only thing we might need to take into consideration would be people who really do need to vote in person. Those are inactive voters who still want to vote, and disabled people who can only vote with a ballot marking device. If we had that in the plan, we could always drop it later. When we have better information, we get closer to June 2nd.
It's Mike. I don't disagree with the broad sense of your plan. You're trying to keep options open and make choices down the road. I'm not sure we can do that in the sense of the time frame that we have. I think we'll probably all agree to send ballots out to the eligible voters, absentee ballots. So I don't think anyone on the board is going to disagree with that. send the ballots out. Don't send out samples, send out ballots. With a notice in there, due to the health emergency, strongly encourage vote, absentee, that sort of thing. But just to get that done, we're now virtually on the edge of April, and we're just going to run into issues with printers. We're going to run into issues with, trying to obtain things. The health department's going to be giving us information as we go along, and then we're going to say, okay, we're shutting down this stuff that we were going to keep open, which has the potential for confusing people. I just think we're in a compressed time frame and imperfect information. Through no one's fault. Don't get me wrong about that. But our information is, by the nature of the crisis, is imperfect, incomplete, and to some degree lags behind the situation as it actually exists. Helps try to correct that. Go.
This is Linda. We need to decide now. If we constantly argue through the courts when we get a challenge to the ballot or whatever, that elections is a process. It's not just a step. It's a process with many, many steps in it. And the staff, both at my office and at the local boards, need to have some certainty as to what's going to happen. And once we make a decision, it is extremely difficult to change it. It has huge impacts to the whole system. So you can't just sort of keep saying, well, we can make a decision now and change it later. It doesn't work that way. Believe me, it's very, very difficult. And you've got a stretched out staff already, both in my office and especially in the Congressional District 7 counties, who then have to turn around after they conduct their election and do a statewide presidential primary. You're asking a lot of these people.
Anyone else's thoughts? Okay, so the question becomes, as I said earlier, I believe the board is in agreement to send ballots out. So that's number one. Number two,
enter your building code.
Does anyone, given what we've already been saying, that's why I'm phrasing the question this way, does anyone wish to speak up in favor of voting in person at the early voting centers? Nothing. Next question is, do we want... Go.
This is PJ, I was on mute. I just think that should be kept as an option. I mean, we could sit here today and say the June 2nd election will be vote by mail. It will have early voting options. Excuse me. It will have voting centers on election day, and the governor, not blaming him, but I mean, the chief executive could close everything down, on May 30th and say, given the health situation on May 30th, everyone is sheltered in place. Wouldn't it be easier to plan for the possibilities and then drive down as opposed to expanding?
It's Mike. I think that I don't think there's any possibility of expanding as we go down in the calendar. You and I have both been through this enough that, finding the centers and getting them open and staffing them up and all that, moving up that ladder and putting this into play, I see that as extraordinarily difficult when people haven't been planning breaking it down is easier, except it confuses people. You know, you tell them, well, the polls are going to be open, and then all of a sudden you're putting out the polls are not open. And then people go, well, the polls are open, I'm not going to bother with the absentee ballot, I'll just stop by on the way to work, or whatever, or I'll get out for a walk. And then they get there, and the poll is closed, you know, because they didn't get the word. This is making decisions with imperfect information. But we don't have a choice. We have to make decisions now so that the engine can be turning to do things, to cause things to occur, to make arrangements, to make plans, to recruit people for specific instances or not recruit people for specific things. So I don't like it. I've never liked being in this situation. All of us in our lifetimes, I think, have been to a greater or lesser degree in these situations. There was a senator from Wyoming, I think it was. I was listening to him years ago, and he was speaking, and he was a very, very interesting guy to listen to. And he was talking to a group of college students, young people, and he said, there is no important decision you will ever make in your life when you feel you have enough information. And I must have heard that 20 or 30 years ago, and I have come to believe that that was just one of the wisest things I have ever heard. And that's what we're in right now. We will never have enough information to make this decision today. But today is pretty much when we have to make it, because we've got to give these guys guidance so that they can give it to the governor, who may accept or reject it, but we have to, he has to go there, and thence to the local boards. And by that time, we're into early April. I mean, literally, we're into early April, because governors aren't going to get it till early April. So by the time the local boards have firm guidance, in other words, the governor's accepted it, so on and so forth, we're pushing mid-April. And early voting would start in late May. We're out of time. So I agree with you 100% on feelings, but we're out of time.
This is PJ. I understand. If we make the decision to direct the board to do vote by mail only, and possibly drop off boxes, can we also request an incredible public outreach of how this is going to be done? I want to ensure that people who are not on the rolls are able to get on the rolls, inactive voters. I don't want people shut out. I know none of us want people shut out, but part of it maybe is to ask the governor to use his bully pulpit to let everyone know how June 2nd is going to operate, that election is going to operate.
It's Mike. I agree with you 100%. I think one of the things that Linda should take away from this meeting, and I'm not saying she hasn't already thought about it, but I think it needs to go to the governor. I agree with you. I think it needs to go to the governor. We're changing the way people in Maryland are accustomed to voting, and we're doing it in a big way. And we have got to get information out on every platform, and it's got to be repeated. The local stations have got to come in on this thing, radio, internet. We've got to get this stuff out. And I think that has to be a critical component of any plan at all. So I agree 100% with you on that. Anybody have any other thoughts? All right. Okay, as to number 2, Does anyone here want to have any in-person voting? We already did that. I apologize. Do we want to have drop-off ballots in an early voting phase? Does that even make sense if we're just going with absentee ballots?
This is Kelly again. My understanding that the ballots that we send to all eligible voters are absentee ballots and that they come with a return envelope and postage prepaid. I think that's what makes early voting centers irrelevant. And setting up locations to just collect ballots, I mean, I suppose we could do that, but that seems like it's unnecessary too.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that? Hear none. So it sounds like number 2 would be eliminated in its entirety, and leaving us with number 3, where somebody didn't get the ballot in time, which we know will happen, and they want to drop it off. Do we have any problems with that? Apparently not. Go. Go ahead.
It can be dropped off at a post office. Isn't that correct? That as long as it's postmarked on the date of the election, it's
true.
Good?
That's true. And that would be the guidance.
This is Linda. The post office doesn't often postmark them in a timely fashion. The thought here was that we would have drop-off boxes, like 1 or 2 in smaller counties. If the larger counties wanted to have more, we publicized that fact so that the voters aren't disenfranchised because they couldn't get a post office mark. And it happens all the time.
Okay.
This is PJ. While I admire and love the Postal Service, there are some people that don't trust it, and believe me, I think they'd have more trust in some type of Board of Elections drop-off box in, various locations.
Okay.
Yes, this is Kelly. If it's just a few locations and they've been publicized well, that seems to make sense to me.
Okay, other thoughts? All right, so it seems to me what we have is items 1 and 3. We've eliminated 2 in its entirety for different reasons, but it's eliminated.
I do.
So, Linda, do you want to work up the plan and bring it back to us April 2nd then?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, that was our plan. We were going to flush it out and bring it back. I think that's what you wanted to do, right, Nikki? That's why one of the reasons why we wanted you to have a meeting next week.
Yep.
Right.
Okay. Do you have the guidance you need at this point?
We do.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. With that, I'll consider item number 6 completed. Item number 7. Approval of absentee ballot application. Everybody's received a copy of the absentee ballot application electronically. And Nikki, do you want to say anything about that?
With your permission, I'll ask Aaron to explain the changes.
Absolutely.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Wow, great. Good. So just a few things that I wanted to highlight that were changed if you're looking at the application. Where's my mouse? So, let me see. Hold on 1 second. Here we go. Okay. So if you scroll down to the section that says deadlines for returning this form, you'll see that there's a special general election for the 7th Congressional District, and that wording was changed a little bit. Also, I just want to highlight that last sentence. We say that you only need to complete this form if you have a different mailing address or if you want this ballot by fax or print it from a link. Okay? That's all that was changed there. And then on the second page is the actual application. In section 3, we added a special general election for the 7th Congressional District box. And again, it's basically the same language from the first page. So we will mail you a ballot for the special general election, but you have to fill out section 6 if you want your ballot mailed to a different address or if you want your ballot by fax or internet delivery instead of mail. Those are basically the only changes I made. The third page is the same.
Okay. Okay. Anyone have any questions?
Just real quick, and I think I know the answer to this, but somebody asked me yesterday. On the section about how do you want to receive your ballot, if you're getting the mail ballot, you are not required to give your Maryland driver's license number. Is that correct?
Yes, Bill, you are correct. The only time you have to give your driver's license is if you request to receive your ballot via internet delivery or web delivery.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any other questions? Comments? Okay. This is before us for approval. Chair will entertain a motion to approve the absentee ballot as presented by her. Anybody?
So moved. PJ Hogan.
Kelly, second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Ballot's approved. Application is approved. Item number 8, delegation of essential employees designation. Nikki or Linda?
Okay, I'll do. This is Nikki. So the governor's proclamation of March 17th gave the State Board of Elections authority to designate any of its employees, so state board employees or state employees of any local board of elections, as emergency and essential. And so we are requesting that you delegate that authority to Linda in case that a county sends them all home and tells them they are not to work, and we need them to work to prepare for the election. Obviously, work in a safe environment, but that might need to happen quickly. And so, ask that the board consider delegating that to Linda, through the June 2nd, through the completion of the June 2nd election, which would include canvassing and post-election activities.
Okay. Anybody have any questions?
I don't have any questions, but a comment. Since this authority was given to the State Board of Elections and we're designating Linda to do it, would it be okay if you sent us as members of the State Board of Elections the names of those that you do designate accordingly?
Of course.
Anyone else? Then no further discussion. Chair will entertain a motion to delegate the designation of essential employees to the administrator, with the proviso that if power is exercised, the administrator will inform the state board.
This is PJ. So moved.
Second. Any second?
Malcolm, second.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. I believe there's no old business. I believe there's no new business, unless someone has something. Okay. Disclosure of campaign contributions. Anyone? I actually have a disclosure of $100, and I'm not actually sure what the entity is, but it was Senator McConnell, and it wasn't his campaign, but I believe it was a senatorial campaign. I'll have that for you next time, Nikki. So I wanted to go ahead and make the acknowledgement now.
Thank you.
Okay. Scheduling of next meeting, we already we're we're going to be meeting on April the 2nd, and that'll be, if it's convenient for everyone, it'll be at 2 o'clock. Is that convenient for everyone concerned?
Works for me. Can someone send, please, the invite, just like this one, to the Google Hangouts?
Yep.
Okay. All right. I believe that's complete. That being the case, then we're April 2nd at 1400. That being the case, I believe that completes the matters that are before the board.
Oh, one other thing before you adjourn.
Sure. Yeah.
I'd like to wish everyone the 386th anniversary for Maryland Day. Today is Maryland Day, so 386th anniversary. Thank you.
Very, very nice. All right, and with that, I'll take a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
This is Kelly.
Any second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor of adjourning, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very, very much. Mr. Yee, if you're still there, thank you very much for being on. You've been a terrific help. And we'll all be electronically back together again on April 2nd. Take care.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.